Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into something pretty fascinating today. It's the history of feeding the U.S. Army.
Oh, that's a big one.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
All the different things soldiers have had to eat to keep going, to stay fighting fit.
Right.
So you've got this research article from 1995. It's really interesting. It goes into the whole evolution of those field rations.
Okay.
And you wouldn't believe some of the stuff they used to eat.
Mm.
I was reading that Genghis Khan's armies, they actually drank horse blood to keep themselves going.
I mean, that's pretty extreme.
Yeah.
But I guess it shows you, right? Just how crucial it is. I mean, to keep troops fed no matter what.
Right, no matter what the circumstances are. I can't imagine horse blood would be a big hit with today's soldiers, though.
Yeah, I don't think so.
But let's go back to the beginning, like way back.
Okay.
So the Continental Army, 1775, their rations were actually surprisingly consistent.
Oh.
You had your pork, or maybe fish, bread or flour, peas or beans, and even, get this, spruce beer or cider.
Wow.
Yeah. And this basic combo, believe it or not, it lasted for about a century.
That's interesting. What do you think that is?
I think it just goes to show, what was available back then had to
Right.
be local, and they had to be able to keep it, preserve it.
Right.
And then as warfare, became more mobile, more technology involved,
Yeah.
well, that old approach just wasn't going to cut it.
No, I guess not.
And speaking of changing warfare, World War I, that really forced some big changes.
Right.
Picture yourself as a soldier in a trench.
Okay.
You're surrounded by mud, rats, the threat of gas attacks.
Mm,
You're in a trench. The food has to be able to survive all that.
it's got to be tough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's where we see those specialized packages starting to come in.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you had the trench ration, for instance.
The trench ration.
Basically a giant container, sealed up tight, full of canned goods.
Hmm.
Not exactly gourmet,
Mm.
No, probably not.
But it was designed to protect the food from all that contamination.
I see.
So it was a step in the right direction. But I bet those things were heavy and not very easy to carry around.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then you get to World War II
Right.
with all those different combat theaters.
Totally different environments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the need for better rations just exploded.
Well, yeah, I bet they had to really step it up.
Totally.
Yeah.
World War II was a turning point, I think, in ration development.
I could see that.
You had the Quartermaster Corps. They really stepped up. They partnered with universities, private industry,
Okay.
to come up with rations that would work in all these different climates and combat situations.
I see.
And that's where you get the iconic C ration.
It's a sea ration. Ah, yes.
That was the first individually packaged combat ration, from what I've read.
Hmm.
Yeah, and the article actually lists out all the components. Canned meats, biscuits, sugar, even chewing gum.
Chewing gum.
Chewing gum, yeah. Why chewing gum, I wonder?
Well, I guess, keep your spirits up, fresh breath, maybe.
Makes sense, yeah.
But the sea ration was revolutionary because it meant, soldiers could carry their own food.
Right.
They weren't so reliant on those field kitchens and supply lines.
More mobile.
Right.
Mm.
And that mobility was crucial in those fast-paced battles.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I've also heard the sea ration wasn't always the most, appetizing.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did they even try to make them taste better?
Well, I think flavor became a bigger factor, especially for rations meant to last a while. Take the K ration, for instance.
Okay.
Designed for airborne troops, so it had to be super compact, packed with nutrients.
K ration.
Yeah.
Yeah, 3 little boxes for a whole day's worth of food.
That's right.
And it's funny, I read that one researcher actually tracked troop movements by following the trail of discarded K-ration biscuits.
Oh, wow.
So, sounds like they weren't exactly a hit.
Not a favorite. No.
But I guess with the K-ration, it was more about, how small it was and how many calories it packed.
Right. Practicality over palatability.
Exactly. It wasn't meant for the long haul.
Yeah.
But even with all these improvements, there were still problems.
Oh, yeah. Like,
Well, the article talks about this case study. They call it the dehydrated egg debacle.
the egg debacle. That sounds messy.
And what happened was they thought dehydrated eggs,
Yeah.
right, they'd be perfect.
Oh, sure. Makes sense.
Lightweight, shelf-stable, full of protein.
Perfect for rations.
Right. But then in the South Pacific, with all that heat and humidity,
Uh-oh.
they started going bad really quickly, making soldiers sick.
Oh, no. So what was the problem? Bacteria.
Well, at first they thought it was oxidized fat, what makes food taste and smell rancid.
Right, right.
But then they did some investigating, and it turns out the real culprit,
Yeah,
it was a chemical reaction
yeah.
between stuff in the egg yolk, these phospholipids,
Okay,
and glucose,
the sugar.
the sugar. Yeah. Who would have thought?
So how'd they fix it?
They
Wow.
just took the glucose out of the mix before they dehydrated the
Oh,
eggs.
so simple.
Yeah, and that solved the problem. But it shows, how important it was to really understand the science of food preservation.
Yeah, especially in those conditions.
Exactly. So we've got C rations, K rations.
Hmm.
What came next?
Well, Vietnam brought a whole new challenge. Long-range patrols, deep in the jungle.
Oh, right.
That's where the LRP ration came in.
LRP.
Long-range patrol. It had to be lightweight, durable, enough food for days.
Okay. And I'm guessing this is where we start to see some of the technology we associate with modern rations.
You got it.
Yeah.
The LRP ration was one of the first to use freeze-drying.
Freeze drying.
Took out the water weight, but kept the flavor and nutrients. More variety, better taste, even in tough conditions.
Huh. Like the ancestor of those backpacking meals we have today.
Exactly.
Pretty ingenious. But what about the C ration?
Yeah.
What happened to all those cans?
Well, after Vietnam, there was this push to ditch those bulky cans, and that's where the retort pouch enters the scene.
Oh, the retort pouch.
Yeah, those flexible pouches you see MREs in today?
Yeah, yeah. That's a packaging revolution right there.
It is. It's a multi-layered wonder material.
Mm.
It lets them sterilize the food with heat, just like canning,
Oh, okay.
but without all that heavy metal.
So that's how MREs can last for so long on their shelf.
Exactly.
But weren't soldiers kind of not so thrilled with MREs at first?
Yeah, well, they came out in the early 1980s.
Right.
And while they were a big step up portability-wise, shelf life, they weren't perfect.
What was the problem?
Well, for one, there were only 12 entrees to choose from.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so variety was a big issue,
Can you imagine eating the same 12 meals over and over?
especially in those situations. Yeah,
Yeah, not ideal.
not at all.
So how did they make them better?
Well, they really listened to the soldiers. They expanded the menu, added different cuisines, vegetarian options, even desserts.
Oh.
Today, there are over 24 MRE entrees.
That's a huge difference.
Yeah.
But aside from, just adding more choices,
Yeah.
how did they actually make them taste good?
They had to get creative. They started experimenting with new ingredients, different cooking methods, even things like those flameless ration heaters,
Right.
those
Yeah.
little chemical reaction packs
Yeah.
that heat up the food without needing fire.
It's like a little mini kitchen right there on the battlefield.
Exactly.
But with all this focus on, making them taste better, did the nutrition suffer at all?
Not at all. In fact, the nutritional side of rations has always been a top priority. The Army has a whole team of nutritionists, food scientists,
Oh, wow.
researchers who are constantly studying what soldiers need and developing rations to meet those needs.
That's amazing. I mean, the science that must go into something as seemingly simple as an MRE.
It's pretty remarkable. They have to think about everything. Calorie requirements, vitamins, minerals, to make sure soldiers are getting the fuel they need to perform, even under extreme conditions.
So it's not just about keeping them from going hungry. It's about optimizing their performance through nutrition.
Absolutely.
What are some of the biggest challenges when you're designing rations to meet those high standards?
Well, one of the trickiest things is maintaining that nutritional value over time.
Oh, right.
Remember, these rations have to last for years, and they're exposed to all kinds of temperatures, conditions.
Heat, humidity, rough handling. Yeah.
Exactly. So all that can degrade the nutrients. That's why they put so much effort into research and development. They're constantly testing and improving packaging, preservation methods.
Right.
There are strict nutritional standards that those rations have to meet even after being stored for a long time.
So there's this whole hidden world of food science happening behind the scenes.
There is.
Fascinating. How do these military rations, how do they compare to what the average person eats nutritionally?
Oh, that's a good question.
Could someone actually survive on MREs alone for a while?
Well, MREs are designed to be nutritionally complete. They provide everything a soldier needs.
Okay.
So in theory, yes, they could. But it's important to remember they're meant for short-term use.
Right. Not a long-term diet plan.
Exactly. Eating the same things day in and day out, even if it's balanced, wouldn't be very fun.
No. No, you need some variety in life.
You do.
And some enjoyment.
Absolutely.
So it's a balancing act then, finding that sweet spot between nutrition, practicality, and taste.
It really is. And it's something researchers are always trying to improve.
This whole conversation has really opened my eyes to how complicated it is to feed an army.
It's a big operation.
It is. It's like science, logistics, even psychology all mixed together.
Speaking of psychology, you bring up a good point.
Yeah.
Food isn't just fuel, it's also about morale, mental well-being.
Oh, right. Especially in those high-stress situations.
Absolutely.
Huh.
I mean, imagine how a warm, familiar meal could lift a soldier's spirits, especially if they're far from home under pressure.
Absolutely, yeah.
On the flip side, a bad meal can have the opposite effect, right?
Oh, yeah.
Frustration, low morale could even impact their performance.
That's fascinating. So how does the military, how do they take those psychological factors into account when they're designing rations?
Well, they understand that palatability goes beyond just taste. They've put a lot of effort into improving the flavor, texture, and variety of those MREs.
Right.
Because a ration, no matter how nutritious, it's useless if a soldier won't eat it.
So it's like they're trying to bring a little bit of home to the battlefield through food.
In a way, yeah. They try to use familiar flavors, comfort foods when they can. And it's not just about the food itself, it's about the ritual of sharing a meal. Even if it's just an MRE, that social interaction can do wonders for their sense of community, connection.
Right. It's important for maintaining morale, resilience.
Exactly.
It's incredible how something so simple can have such a big impact.
It is.
This whole discussion's got me thinking about how much we take food for granted.
I know what you mean.
We don't always appreciate all the work and thought that goes into getting food to our table.
It's a whole system, isn't it?
It is. And it's not just about getting it there. It's about making sure it's safe, nutritious, and something people actually want to eat.
Right, and enjoy.
And speaking of enjoying, I remember reading something about the military looking into performance-enhancing foods. Is that a real thing or is that science fiction?
Oh, that's definitely a real area of research.
Huh.
I mean, they're not developing super soldier serum in a pouch or anything,
Okay.
but they are looking for ways to use nutrition to optimize soldiers' physical and cognitive performance, really pushing the boundaries of human endurance and resilience.
That's pretty cool. So what kind of things are they looking at?
Well, one focus is on carbs,
Oh, okay.
Their role in fueling intense physical activity. Soldiers need readily available energy for their muscles during combat, other demanding tasks.
So it's about finding the right kinds of carbs, the right amounts for different scenarios.
Exactly, like fine-tuning the fuel for a high-performance engine.
I like that analogy.
And they're also looking at caffeine, other stimulants, to improve alertness, reaction time, cognitive function.
Classic caffeine boost.
Yeah.
But they're doing it scientifically.
Exactly. They want to find the best dosage, the best timing to maximize the benefits without any downsides. And then there are things like antioxidants.
Okay.
Their potential to protect cells from damage caused by all that stress and activity.
It's like giving soldiers internal shields against the wear and tear of their job.
In a way, yeah. They're also exploring probiotics and their potential to improve digestion, boost the immune system, even enhance mood.
It's amazing how much we're learning about the connection between our gut and our well-being.
It is, and this research on military rations, it's really at the forefront of understanding how nutrition can be used to enhance human potential, not just in the military, but for everyone.
That's really exciting to think about. But before we get too carried away, I think we need to step back a bit.
Okay.
Look at the bigger picture here. This story of military rations, it's not just about food, is it?
It's not.
It reflects our history, our values, our ingenuity as a society.
Absolutely.
It raises some important questions about the role of technology, the importance of sustainability, and, the ethics of feeding people in extreme situations.
Right. Those are big questions. Where do we even begin?
Well, how about with technology?
Okay.
We've seen how technology has changed everything from canning and freeze drying to those retort pouches and flameless heaters.
Yeah, constantly trying to overcome spoilage, weight, those logistical challenges.
It's a constant race, isn't it?
It is. But technology always has a trade-off.
Right.
We have to think about the environmental impact of packaging, potential waste, the ethics of creating food just for survival, not for enjoyment.
So it's not just about blindly chasing the latest and greatest technology. It's about using it wisely.
Exactly. And that brings us to sustainability. As the world's population keeps growing and resources become more scarce, we need to find ways to feed people in a way that's environmentally responsible.
Reducing waste, conserving resources, minimizing our impact on the planet. Is the military, are they doing anything to address these concerns?
They are. They're looking into biodegradable packaging, reducing energy consumption in food production, promoting sustainable sourcing.
That's good to hear.
They're taking a more holistic approach, thinking about the long-term impact of their decisions.
Right, because it's not just an ethical issue, it's a strategic one too.
Exactly. If you're relying on unsustainable practices, that can lead to vulnerabilities down the line.
That's a great point. And then, of course, there are the ethical considerations. I mean, military rations are often used in situations where people are displaced, vulnerable, facing really tough circumstances.
That's true. And it reminds us that food isn't just about staying alive, it's also about dignity, respect. We need to make sure rations are distributed fairly, that they meet the cultural and dietary needs of different people,
Right.
and that they're used in a way that respects human rights.
That's a lot to think about. It highlights how complex these issues are, surrounding food and its role in our world.
It really does. But it's a crucial conversation to have. And it's good to see the military taking a lead in tackling these challenges. Their research and innovations could have a big impact on how we all think about and approach food in the future.
This whole conversation has been incredibly insightful. It's made me realize that this story of military rations, it's like a miniature version of our own relationship with food.
I agree. It's a story that's still being written. But before we dive into the future of food, there's another aspect I think is worth exploring.
Okay.
We've talked about the American approach to rations, but what about other cultures around the world?
Yeah,
How do they handle the challenge of feeding their troops?
that's a great question. I'm guessing cheese and wine aren't standard issue in every army.
You're right about that.
Yeah.
What's considered palatable or even appealing varies a lot from culture to culture.
Right.
And the military has to consider those differences when they're designing rations for soldiers from diverse backgrounds.
So it's not just about calories and shelf life. It's
Yeah.
about respecting those cultural preferences, traditions.
Exactly. They have to consider things like religious dietary laws, taste preferences, even the symbolic meaning of certain foods.
It's a logistical and culinary puzzle all rolled into one. Do you have any, specific examples of how different cultures approach this?
Sure. Take the French Army, for example.
Okay.
They're known for their emphasis on quality and freshness. Even in their field rations, they often include things like cheese, cured meats,
Okay.
and, you guessed it, wine.
Wine in a ration pack.
It is.
That's incredible.
But it just shows their cultural values, how important food is to their sense of pleasure camaraderie.
I can see how sharing a bottle of wine could definitely boost morale, even in a combat zone.
Absolutely. And another interesting example is the Israeli army. Right.
They have a unique challenge because of those kosher dietary laws.
Oh, right. No mixing meat and dairy.
Exactly. Very complex set of rules.
Yeah.
So they've developed a system with color-coded packaging and labeling so soldiers can easily identify and separate meat and dairy items.
That's brilliant. It's like a culinary puzzle, making sure everything stays separate and kosher. It shows how much thought goes into designing these rations to meet those specific cultural needs.
It does. It's a testament to their ingenuity and adaptability to create rations that are both culturally sensitive and logistically sound.
This whole conversation about cultural differences has been fascinating.
It is interesting, isn't it?
It's a reminder that food isn't just a biological necessity. It's deeply connected to our culture, our identity.
Absolutely. And there's so much we can learn from other cultures when it comes to food.
Yeah.
They have a wealth of knowledge and experience, from traditional cooking techniques to innovative ways of preserving food. It makes you think of all the possibilities out there. But I suppose we should bring this deep dive back to the American experience.
Sounds good.
We've covered a lot today. The history of rations, the science of nutrition, the cultural side of food.
It's been a good overview.
It has. But before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought to ponder.
Okay.
All right, listeners, here's your food for thought. We've seen how these military rations have evolved, driven by the need to feed soldiers in these challenging, dangerous environments. But what lessons can we learn from this journey that apply to our own lives,
Right.
even if we're not facing combat or living in extreme conditions?
Good question. Maybe it's a reminder to be more aware of the food we eat, to appreciate the hard work and ingenuity that goes into producing it,
Yeah,
and to be grateful for the abundance we often take for granted.
that's a good point. Maybe it inspires us to be more creative and resourceful in our own kitchens, Experiment with new ingredients, new cooking techniques, and find that joy in preparing and sharing a meal.
Or maybe it's a call to action to be more involved in the conversation about food security and sustainability, to advocate for policies that ensure everyone has access to safe, nutritious, affordable food.
These are all important things to think about. And ultimately, this whole story of military rations, it reminds us that food is more than just fuel.
No, it's not.
It's a fundamental human need that connects us all, no matter where we come from or what our circumstances are.
Well said. So, next time you sit down to a meal, take a moment to appreciate the journey that food has taken to get to your plate.
And maybe even raise a glass to those unsung heroes of food science, logistics, agriculture, all those people working behind the scenes to feed the world.
Cheers to that. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of military rations.
It's been a delicious adventure.
It has.
But we're not quite done yet. We've explored the past and present of military rations, but what about the future? What innovations are on the horizon?
That's a great question, and it's one we'll be diving into in our next segment. We'll explore cutting-edge technologies like 3D printed food and bioengineered crops, and how they might change the way we feed soldiers and everyone else too.
Sounds like we're about to enter the realm of science fiction. Don't miss our next segment where we'll unpack the future of food.
So we were talking about those first MREs in the early 80s.
Yeah, those early ones.
Not exactly gourmet.
Not quite. Imagine you're a soldier, right? You've just traded in your heady Kansas Sea rations for these new lightweight pouches.
Okay.
Exciting at first, I bet. But then that excitement fades pretty quickly when you realize your menu options are, well, really limited.
I can see that. What were some of the complaints back then?
Well, there were only 12 entrees to start, and some of them weren't exactly, crowd pleasers.
Right.
Soldiers got tired of the lack of variety, and they definitely let the developers know.
I bet they did.
It became clear that making those MREs taste good, that was going to be just as important as making them last a long time and easy to carry. So how did they improve them?
They listened to the feedback, and they started expanding the menu. Over the years, they have added more entrees, different types of cuisines, vegetarian options, even desserts.
Wow.
Today, there are over 24 different MRE entrees to choose from.
That's a big difference.
Yeah.
Sounds like they really take those complaints to heart.
They did.
But I'm curious, beyond just adding more options, how do they tackle the challenge of actually making MREs taste, well, good?
They had to get creative, that's for sure. Experimenting with new ingredients, different ways of cooking, even things like those flameless ration heaters.
Oh, right. The ones that use a chemical reaction to heat things up.
Exactly.
No fire needed.
Nope.
That's amazing. It's like bringing a mini kitchen to the battlefield.
It is. But with all this focus on making them more appealing, did they have to sacrifice any of the nutritional value?
That's a good question.
Not at all. Actually, the nutritional aspect of rations has always been a top priority for the Army. They've got a whole team of nutritionists, food scientists, researchers.
Wow.
They're constantly studying what soldiers need and developing those rations to meet those needs.
It's mind-boggling to think about the science that must go into something like an MRE.
It is. They have to consider everything: calorie requirements, vitamin and mineral content, everything.
Right.
They have to make sure that those soldiers are getting the fuel they need to perform, even in the toughest conditions.
So it's not just about keeping them from going hungry. It's about actually optimizing their performance through nutrition.
Exactly.
What are some of the key challenges in designing rations that meet those high standards, though?
Well, one of the biggest ones is maintaining the nutritional integrity over time.
Oh, right. Because they have to last for so long.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Remember, these rations need to have a shelf life of several years, and they're exposed to all sorts of temperatures and environmental conditions.
Right. Heat, humidity, rough handling.
All of that. And all of that can degrade the nutrients over time. That's why they've invested so much in research and development, constantly testing and improving packaging technologies, preservation methods.
Makes sense.
They have very strict nutritional standards that those rations have to meet, even after prolonged storage.
That's fascinating. It's like this whole hidden world of food science going on behind the scenes.
It is.
I'm curious, how do these military rations stack up against what the average person eats, nutritionally speaking? Could you survive on MREs alone for a long period of time?
Well, MREs are designed to be nutritionally complete. They've got all the essential nutrients a soldier needs.
Okay.
So technically, yes, they could. But, it's important to remember that MREs are really meant for short-term use. They're not intended to be a long-term dietary solution.
Yeah, eating the same thing day after day, even if it's balanced, it would get old pretty fast.
It would. You need variety and enjoyment in a healthy diet.
Absolutely. So it's about finding that balance between nutrition, practicality, and palatability.
It really is, and it's a challenge that researchers are constantly working to overcome.
This whole conversation has really opened my eyes to how complex this whole system is.
Yeah.
It's really a remarkable blend of science, logistics, even psychology.
You know, you bring up a really interesting point about psychology.
Yeah.
Food isn't just fuel for the body. It plays a huge role in morale and mental well-being, especially in those high-stress environments.
It makes sense. I can only imagine what a warm, familiar meal could do for a soldier's spirits, especially when they're far from home and dealing with so much.
Absolutely. A good meal can boost morale, foster camaraderie, even reminds soldiers of home.
Yeah.
And a bad meal, well, that can have the opposite effect, lead to frustration, low morale, potentially even impact their performance.
Wow, so food really can have a powerful psychological impact.
It can.
So how does the military take those factors into account when they're designing rations?
Well, they understand that palatability goes beyond just taste. They've done a lot of research to try to improve the flavor, the texture, the variety of MREs. They want to make sure that soldiers actually want to eat them.
Right.
Because a ration, no matter how nutritious, it's useless if the soldier won't eat it.
Makes sense. It's like trying to book a little bit of home to the battlefield through food.
Exactly. They try to incorporate familiar flavors, comfort foods whenever they can. And it's not just about the food itself, it's about the ritual of sharing a meal. Even if it's just an MRE, that social interaction, that can do wonders for their sense of community and connection.
Right.
And that's vital for maintaining morale and resilience.
It's amazing how something as simple as a shared meal can have such a big impact on well-being. This whole discussion has me thinking about how much we take food for granted.
It's true.
We don't always stop to think about all those complex factors that go into getting food to our tables.
Right. It's a whole process.
Mhm.
And it's not just about getting it there. It's about making sure it's safe, nutritious, appealing enough for people to eat and enjoy.
Exactly. Speaking of appealing, I remember reading something about the military exploring performance-enhancing foods.
Oh, yeah.
Is that a real thing or is that just science fiction?
That's a real area of research. They're not quite developing, super soldier serum in a pouch, but they are exploring ways to use nutrition to optimize how soldiers perform, both physically and mentally.
Okay.
They're really pushing the boundaries of human endurance and resilience.
So what kinds of things are they looking at?
Well, one area of focus is on carbohydrates
Okay.
and how they fuel intense physical activity. Soldiers need easily accessible energy to power their muscles during combat or other demanding tasks. So it's about finding the best types and amounts of carbs for different situations.
It's like fine-tuning the fuel for a high-performance engine.
Exactly.
What else?
Well, they're also looking at caffeine and other stimulants to see how they can improve alertness, reaction time, and cognitive function.
Ah, the classic caffeine boost.
Yeah.
I bet soldiers have been relying on that for centuries.
They have, but now researchers are trying to figure out the optimal dose and timing to maximize the benefits without any negative side effects.
Right.
They're also investigating antioxidants and how they might protect cells from damage caused by all the stress and intense activity.
It's like they're trying to equip soldiers with internal shields to protect them from the wear and tear of their job.
In a way, yeah, and they're looking into things like probiotics and their potential benefits too.
Probiotics.
Yeah, improving digestion, boosting the immune system, even possibly enhancing mood.
It's amazing how much we're learning about the connection between our gut health and our overall well-being.
It is. And all of this research on military rations, it's really at the forefront of understanding how nutrition can be used to enhance human potential, not just for the military, but for everyone.
It's exciting to think about all the possibilities, but before we get too carried away with the future, I think it's important to step back and think about the broader implications of all this. This story of military rations, it's more than just a history of food, isn't it?
It is.
It reflects our history, our values, our ingenuity.
Absolutely. It raises some important questions about technology, the importance of sustainability, and the ethics of how we feed people in extreme situations.
Those are big questions. Where do we even begin?
Well, how about with technology? We've seen how technological innovations have played such a crucial role in how rations have evolved, from canning and freeze drying to retort pouches and flameless heaters.
It's like this constant race to overcome spoilage, weight, all those logistical challenges.
It is. But with technology, there are always trade-offs.
Right.
We need to think about the environmental impact of packaging, the potential for waste, even the ethics of creating food that's designed purely for survival and not enjoyment.
So it's not just about blindly pursuing the latest and greatest technology. It's about using it responsibly and thoughtfully.
Exactly. And that brings us to sustainability. As the world population grows and resources become more scarce, we need to find ways to feed people that are environmentally responsible.
Reducing waste, conserving resources, minimizing our impact. Is the military doing anything to address those concerns?
They are. They're exploring things like biodegradable packaging, they're reducing the energy consumption of food production, promoting sustainable sourcing practices.
That's good to hear. It sounds like they're taking a more holistic approach, thinking about the long-term impact of their choices.
They are. Sustainability isn't just an ethical issue, it's a strategic one, too.
Right.
Reliance on unsustainable practices could create vulnerabilities down the road.
That's a great point. And finally, there are the ethical considerations. Military rations are often used in situations where people are displaced, vulnerable, facing really difficult circumstances.
That's true. It reminds us that food isn't just about sustenance, it's also about dignity and respect. We have to make sure those rations are distributed fairly, that they meet the cultural and dietary needs of different populations.
Right.
And that they're used in a way that upholds human rights.
It's a lot to think about. It really highlights how complex all these issues are surrounding food and its role in the world.
It does, but ultimately, it's a conversation worth having. And it's encouraging to see that the military is taking a leading role in addressing these challenges. Their research and innovations could have a real impact on how we all think about and approach food in the future.
This whole conversation has been incredibly insightful. It's made me realize that the story of military rations is really a microcosm of our own relationship with food.
I agree. It's a story that's still being written. But before we dive into the future of food, there's another aspect I think is worth exploring. We've talked about the American approach to rations.
Yeah.
But what about other cultures around the world? How do they handle the challenge of feeding their troops?
That's a great question. I have a feeling cheese and wine aren't standard issue in every army.
You're probably right. What's considered palatable or even appealing varies a lot from culture to culture, and the military has to take those differences into account when they're designing rations for soldiers from all those diverse backgrounds.
So it's not just about calories and shelf life. It's about respecting those cultural preferences, those traditions.
Exactly. They have to think about things like religious dietary restrictions, taste preferences, even the symbolic meaning of certain foods.
It sounds like a logistical and culinary puzzle. Do you have any examples of how different cultures approach this?
Sure. Take the French army, for example.
Okay.
They're known for their emphasis on quality and freshness, even in their field rations. They often include things like cheeses, cured meats, and, you guessed it, wine.
Wine in a ration pack.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
It is. It really speaks to their cultural values, how important food is to their sense of pleasure and camaraderie.
I can definitely see how sharing a bottle of wine could boost morale, even in a combat zone.
Absolutely. And another interesting example is the Israeli army. They have a unique challenge because of the kosher dietary laws, which prohibit mixing meat and dairy.
Oh, right.
It's a complex set of rules.
It is?
So they've developed this really sophisticated system of color-coded packaging and labeling so soldiers can easily identify and separate meat and dairy items.
That's brilliant. It's like a culinary puzzle, making sure everything stays separate and kosher. It shows how much thought goes into designing these rations to meet those specific cultural needs.
It does. It highlights the ingenuity and adaptability required to create rations that are both culturally sensitive and logistically sound.
This whole conversation about the cultural differences has been fascinating. It's a good reminder that food isn't just a biological necessity. It's deeply intertwined with our culture and identity.
It is. And it's a reminder that we can learn a lot from other cultures when it comes to food. They have so much knowledge and experience, from traditional cooking techniques to innovative ways of preserving food.
It makes you think about all the possibilities out there. But I suppose we should bring this deep dive back to the American experience.
Sounds good.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from the history of rations to the science of nutrition to the cultural aspects of food.
It's been a good overview.
It really has. But before we wrap up, I wanted to leave our listeners with a final thought to ponder.
Okay.
Okay, listeners, here's your food for thought. We've seen how the evolution of military rations has been driven by this need to feed soldiers in challenging and dangerous environments.
Right.
But what are the lessons we can learn from all this that we can apply to our own lives, even if we're not in combat or living in extreme conditions?
That's a great question. Maybe it's a reminder to be more mindful of the food that we eat, appreciate the effort that goes into producing it, and be more grateful for the abundance that we often take for granted.
It could be an inspiration to be more creative and resourceful in our own kitchens, to try out new ingredients and cooking techniques, and to find that joy in simply preparing and sharing a meal.
Or maybe it's even a call to action, to be more involved in the conversation about food security and sustainability,
Right.
to advocate for policies that ensure everyone has access to safe, nutritious, and affordable food.
Those are all important points. And ultimately, the story of military rations shows us that food is so much more than just sustenance. It's a fundamental human need that connects us all, regardless of our background or our circumstances.
Well said. So next time you sit down to a meal, take a moment to appreciate the incredible journey that food has taken to reach your plate.
And maybe even raise a glass to all those unsung heroes of food science, logistics, agriculture, all the people who work so hard behind the scenes to feed the world.
Cheers to that. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of military rations.
It's been a delicious adventure.
It has.
But we're not done yet. We've explored the past and the present of military rations, but what about the future? What innovations are on the horizon?
That's a great question, and it's one we'll be diving into in our next segment. We'll be exploring cutting-edge technologies like 3D printed food and bioengineered crops, and how they might revolutionize the way we feed soldiers, and everyone else too.
Sounds like we're about to enter the realm of science fiction. Don't miss our next segment where we'll unpack the future of food. So we've journeyed from hardtack to MREs.
Yeah, quite a trip.
But, like everything, the future of feeding soldiers is, well, it's got to be different.
It is. The drive to innovate, it never really stops, especially when you're talking about keeping troops fed and at their best.
So what's on the menu for the soldiers of tomorrow?
Well, one thing that's getting a lot of attention is 3D printed food.
3D printed food. Is that like a real thing?
It is. Imagine printing out meals on demand, tailored to each soldier's needs and, what they like.
That sounds straight out of science fiction. How does that even work?
So they use these edible inks made from things like proteins, carbs, fats.
Right.
And these inks go into a 3D printer that builds up the food layer by layer based on a digital design.
So you could print a steak or pizza.
You could, even a bowl of pasta.
That's mind-blowing. And talk about efficient, especially out in the field.
Exactly. No more bulky packages or limited menus.
Right.
It could change everything about how we think about food production, not just for the military, but for everyone.
Wow, yeah.
Think about disaster relief, remote communities, even growing food sustainably in cities.
It's amazing to think about the possibilities, but 3D printing isn't the only thing, right?
No, there's also bioengineered food. That's a big area of research.
Bioengineered food.
Yeah, using genetic engineering to create foods that are more nutritious, last longer, and can even grow in really tough environments.
So like superfoods that can handle anything.
Pretty much imagine crops growing in the desert, on mountains, places where you couldn't normally farm.
Right.
Or food that can last for years without refrigeration, perfect for long missions or emergencies.
That could change everything for global food security, especially with climate change and all the resource issues.
Absolutely. It shows the power of science and innovation to solve some of the world's biggest problems.
It's exciting to imagine, a future where food is plentiful, personalized, sustainable,
Yeah.
and tailored to our needs.
It is, and it's important to remember these innovations, they're not just for soldiers.
Right.
They could change how we all eat and think about food.
It's a reminder that finding ways to feed an army can lead to discoveries that help everyone.
Exactly. It shows how interconnected our world is, how one solution can have ripple effects everywhere.
This whole deep dive has been amazing. We've gone from the past to the present to the future of military rations.
And the innovation just keeps going.
It does. It shows human ingenuity, our ability to adapt, and our need to nourish ourselves no matter what.
Well said.
Well, on that note, we've come to the end of our deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you've enjoyed this exploration of military rations with us.
And until next time, bon appétit, à Chébert!